This one's a classic.
Of the 3 magician classes in old-school MapleStory, there were 2 whose otherwise impactful presence was muted by the extreme dominance of Bishop. In the early days, it had been speculated that mages were originally conceived as a single class who had access to all 4 elements, later broken into 2 separate classes with similar but opposing capabilities. I can't speak to the veracity of these claims, but it's still neat to think about. Today we're talking about Ice Lightning Archmages in old MapleStory, one of the 2 elemental Archmage classes in MapleStory who, despite their older sibling absolutely crushing the meta and becoming the favorite child, are still exceptional and beloved classes. Ice Lightning Mages were the recipient of a few of the coolest skills in the game. Pun intended. Ice Demon, Blizzard, Thunder Spear. I mean, I could sit here and name off every Ice Lightning skill and there wouldn't be a single miss. Even their second job skills stood out as particularly fascinating skills that granted them access to elemental damage as early as level 30. Ice Lightning Archmages are exceptionally great farmers, easily dealing some of the highest single-line damage with their ultimate. But before we can get there, we have to go through the journey of a magician. So let's explore the coolest class in the game and preserve some of the history of a class that had to live in the shadow of Bishop, despite having a very compelling story of their own. Before we get into it, this video is sponsored by Eidolon, the free idle MMO you can play right now on Steam. Pets have always been one of my favorite parts of any MMO, as you probably know by now. And the new Grand Tournament in Eidolon is a way to finally put my massive pet collection to use. Thousands of players competing against one another for the ultimate prize, glory in the form of a champion pet. The tournament will begin soon, so stick around and we'll talk about it more later in the video. Meet Cold Boy, a brand new character definitely not made as an alt for someone who had a level 90 ranger. Maple Island was always a tough grind for int users, before the addition of 3 snails or even its subsequent buff that removed the snail shell requirement. The most efficient path for these characters, who were rarely hitting more than 1 point of damage on an enemy, was to simply kill regular snails the entire time, for all 1200 XP they needed. Quests weren't really a viable choice, as they couldn't be completed in any sort of timely manner, given the requirements of killing monsters that just took too long to kill at a measly 1 damage per hit. This grind was not too quick, but it was relatively easy. It starts out slow, but this class would eventually become one of the top farmers, given enough time to grow. Level 8 is just a small part of the greater world that Ice Lightning Mages would be experiencing, and the first step to reaching that was becoming a magician. This initial job advancement to magician was still the same story as it was on Maple Island. Pretty tough, scaling very well over time. By the end of first job, magicians were possibly the strongest and most sustainable of all the classes. The first magician skill we're going to talk about is improved MP recovery. This is a skill we've discussed before in this series, and it finds itself situated in a more useful position than its warrior equivalent. In fact, it's even more useful on Ice Lightning than it was for bishops. Passive MP recovery is already super valuable and extremely important for magicians early to mid-game, so this skill is more viable than it might initially seem, especially as Cold Boy progresses further. What would only be more useful is a skill that increases a magician's max MP, which is precisely what improved max MP does for the class. However, if you can believe it, this is not actually where the overwhelming majority of the class's max MP comes from, and we'll talk about that soon. Another vital skill, what you could reasonably argue was the single most important of them, is Magic Guard. This skill replaces a portion of damage taken with MP, and taking effectively 20% incoming damage is no joke. Where other classes would either get enough HP to tank a hit or simply die, Magicians had a cool third option that nobody else got access to. Don't have enough HP to tank a hit? You'll be fine. You have 200 billion MP. Magic armor is not quite as useful. Its plus 40 weapon defense is technically very helpful, especially in the early game where that amount of weapon defense would cut out a significant percentage of incoming damage. However, its obvious downfall is that it takes away points from other skills that have long-term viability in favor of what is effectively nothing more than short-term relief. This is one I usually skip. Energy Bolt is the first attacking skill a magician has access to. This skill restricts the next attacking skill, so it's actually mandatory that every magician gets Energy Bolt, assuming they want to actually deal damage to anything ever, or if they want to level up. It's really not a fantastic skill, especially when put up against Magic Claw. Magic Claw is the final first job magician skill, the iconic one. Yeah, it was cool to throw energy bolts at orange mushrooms, but Magic Claw was practically busted by comparison. Energy Bolt has similar properties to a throwing star or an arrow, any projectile, really. This would prevent it from passing through objects, and would also require it to actually travel to and reach the monster at the proper angle. Which doesn't sound terrible on paper. In practice, though, this was frustrating at best, considering how Magic Claw would just attack anything in its range with no caveats. Magicians are in a weird spot in early first job. While other classes were easily capable of killing enemies with regular attacks, magicians are practically forced to burn mana in order to access the same capabilities. They just have no stats that increase their damage outside of spells. Because of this, Magician can be unforgiving for a while, but not for very long. This might come as a surprise given classic Magician's identity in the modern day as a powerful trio of farming classes who seem to have practically no weaknesses other than low single-target DPS. Really though, like most classes back in the day in their very early levels, Magicians could struggle. Mana is always more expensive than HP. This is usually a 2-to-1 ratio of Mesos to MP, not accounting for percent-based recovery potions. What this translates to in practice is simply more expensive recovery for magicians. Add to this increased cost the possibility of draining both HP and MP at the same time through the use of Magic Guard, and a first job magician can get pretty expensive pretty quick. Ultimately, in the long run, Magic Guard would work in their favor, but first job was filled with plenty of sitting on benches or chairs waiting for HP and MP to recover. And it was more efficient to skip using Magic Guard in first job. And this is where improved MP recovery comes into play. Generally, players only get access to this skill after maxing both improved max MP increase and Magic Claw, and there weren't enough skill points given in first job to max these 3 skills plus Magic Guard. You only get 61. However, because Magic Claw will eventually fall off in usefulness, there is the option of simply keeping it at a low enough level that you can max improve MP recovery, which is a skill that will technically retain value indefinitely at the cost of something that's only useful in first job. Yes, this is a compromise magicians had to seriously consider. This is how I usually build mages in old MapleStory. The base MP recovery value is 3 MP every 10 seconds, which is practically nothing. However, with even a single point added to improving MP recovery, which all magicians will have, this formula changes permanently. The new formula includes the character's level as a variable, so this skill actually finds use forever on a magician. Over the many hours of farming they'll be doing, especially given mages' increased MP usage, which we'll discuss soon, recovering hundreds of MP every 10 seconds can add up over time. At level 150, this creates 86,000 MP recovered per hour out of nothing if the player maxed improving MP recovery. Admittedly, this is not a game-changing amount, considering GMS's busted mana bowl potions, which greatly lowered the overall cost of mana, but this is still more useful than Magic Claw is in 4th job. Training an early first job for any magician depends greatly on funding level. Without that funding, the earliest of the levels can be extremely tough to get through, like we discussed. Luckily, this period of time doesn't last very long, even if you're a perma-beginner using the basic attack, and magicians are one of the quickest classes to acquire huge amounts of wealth. This is partially due to their insane damage potential with a luckless build that requires a grand total of 0 mesos spent on gear to outdamage just about every other first job class. If a first job Ice Lightning Mage goes luckless, they'll enjoy the best damage output that allows them to dominate the PQ game. Kerning PQ is a magician's paradise for a number of reasons. Warriors struggle to have the accuracy to hit the monsters. Archers are struggling to deal good damage without mastery. Pirates suffer from both of these issues, while rogues and magicians have everything they need. We've already covered how powerful Nightlord is from start to finish, and a lot of the same elements of their early dominance also apply to magicians. For example, spell damage. Much in the same way Lucky 7 has built-in mastery that ignores the second job passive skill, magician spells all have their own built-in mastery. In the case of Magic Claw, it has 60% mastery by level 20. Since spell damage accounts for this mastery, this results in stable damage and very few low rolls, if any. On top of this, accuracy for magicians is calculated differently. The accuracy number reflected in their stat window was not representative of their actual ability to hit monsters. Instead, it's a relatively simple formula. This means both int and luck effectively increase accuracy much in the same way a gun pirate, archer, or thief's main stats increase accuracy. Because of this, magicians don't usually struggle to hit anything around their level. No friction there. It does become a problem if they try to hit monsters too far outside of their range, which is something fire poison mages have to contend with, but your average ice lightning will probably never run into this issue. Then there's the fact that int and magic attack are effectively the same stat, where one int increases magic attack by 1 point while the inverse is not true. So if a magician uses the level 8 wooden wand and pumps all of their AP into int, they'd be gaining 5 magic attack every single level instead of spreading that out to luck. As we know with the magician accuracy formula, int will still increase accuracy, so there's no loss incurred by going luckless. This is one of the many weird, quirky design choices of old MapleStory that defines the life of a magician. You just don't have to participate in most of the core game mechanics in order to be optimal. That being said, I do still think magician gear is some of the coolest in the game, and if you want to build luck, don't let anyone stop you from fulfilling your dreams. Because of all of these factors, magician is kind of a menace in late first job, on par with future Night Lords in pretty much every conceivable way. Arguably better, even, considering Magic Claw's unique spell status that allows the magician to hit monsters through walls. I swear this is useful and not an extremely niche circumstance that almost never happens that I just couldn't get out of my mind. A first job magician, once they're properly set up, can train just about anywhere. The only concern is mobility at this point, but since they're effectively ranged attackers who also have no minimum distance requirement, the world is their oyster. I mean, clam. Cold Boy has effectively disarmed every other player he encountered on the road to level 30 through sheer intimidation, and he's now ready to become an Ice Lightning Wizard, the second job advancement on the path to becoming an Arch Mage. Getting to the second job advancement instructor in the northern field of Illenia was maybe the most ridiculous of all classes. Luckily, this was no archer job advancement, so it was very easy for Cold Boy to actually kill the monsters. Most second job advancements are pretty significant. They serve as the start of the class's truly unique identity and tend to change the game for just about everyone. For Wizard, it was even a good bit more impactful than that, if you ask me. The first second job wizard skill is one we've seen before, MP Eater. This is a passive skill that leeches MP from monsters at a set rate anytime a spell is used on that monster. It's not a widely discussed fact, but practically every single monster in the game has MP to suck away, and wizards love that. The next skill on the list is Meditation, a buff skill that lasts 200 seconds and increases the party's magic attack by 20. This one never made a lot of sense to me though, if I'm being honest. There are only 3 classes in the game who would benefit from this to begin with, and 2 of them already have access to it. That only leaves clerics to benefit from meditation, and second job is when their damage output is arguably at its peak. And they're probably going to be using heal for most of that damage output, where plus 20 magic attack is practically meaningless for the damage formula. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Then we have Teleport, an incredibly valuable mobility skill, especially in the old school era where mobility was practically non-existent. Like, are you a Night Lord? No? Okay, you get to buy an expensive mount and you still have less mobility. Just be happy we don't delete your class like we did with Jet. Slow is the first CC skill that Ice Lightning Wizards gain access to, but it's really not amazing. This skill can be used on non-boss monsters to slow their movement speed for 40 seconds, which is more of a novelty rather than a practical skill to be used on a daily basis in any meaningfully impactful way. It's cool though. I gotta stop using the word cool in this video. Speaking of cool, next up is Cold Beam. It only hits one enemy, which is very detrimental to its overall viability, but this is the first skill Ice Lightning Wizards receive that can actually freeze enemies, which is pretty much their biggest strength as a class. The final skill in second job is Thunderbolt. Arguably a bit more useful as a training skill than Cold Beam given its mobbing capabilities, this skill deals lightning elemental damage on up to 6 enemies. It's a very good mobbing skill, and it's definitely a standout among second job classes. We've talked a bit about luckless versus regular luck, and the story is much the same for Ice Lightning Wizards throughout their entire life. Luckless is far superior for them, even when compared to bishops, because of the available endgame weapon choices. Bishops were strong, sure, but their strength came from their insane utility. Ice Lightning Archmages were different. A good problem to have on a second job character is too many good skills. The only one of these not really worth heavily investing in is slow. Everything else has some level of utility. In the good old days of 2007, MP Eater was a highly desirable passive skill for all magicians, usually one of the earliest to be maxed. Its ability to save mesos by restoring MP on every hit was simply unrivaled by anything else. I'd say one of the less compelling early choices is meditation, though. This skill has always stood out to me as a very weird inclusion for a game designed the way MapleStory is. As mentioned earlier, meditation will increase the magic attack of everyone in the party by +20. Great, that sounds awesome, but the only class who benefits from this and doesn't have access to it is Cleric. And I've always thought this was so fascinating, because the circumstances required for meditation to have a meaningful effect on a cleric's damage output are essentially impossible to achieve. In second job, clerics are pretty much exclusively using Heal and Magic Claw, the latter of which would benefit reasonably from +20 magic attack, but that's not what I find interesting. Heal makes for a much more compelling story. Let's take a look at Heal's damage formula. Since magic effectively acts as a multiplier of the total stat value of the cleric, they need insane amounts of stat for this +20 magic attack to meaningfully increase their heal damage. At low levels, pre-100 or so, you wouldn't even see an increase of +20 damage per hit. In order for that to approach meaningful amounts of damage increase, the cleric would need to have like 2,000 total stat, giving them about 60 damage per line. By the way, that's completely impossible. That's the equivalent of reaching level 400. This is only one example, and of course, a free 20 magic attack in the grand scheme of things is absolutely worth the SP required to max the skill. I just always found meditation to be a very weird one. This certainly isn't haste, from which just about everyone can benefit, and it's definitely no sharp eyes or hyper body or holy symbol. It's a good skill. I've just always felt as though it's a little bit undertuned. What wasn't undertuned, in my opinion, is an Ice Lightning Wizard's ability to freeze monsters. If you're not an Ice Lightning enthusiast, it may be tough to wrap your head around, but having access to one of the best crowd control abilities as a primary part of your kit is a really nice feeling. And this class possessed the most powerful version of this CC. Why do you think Blizzard nerfed May's ability to freeze enemies? It's like a perk now, I think. It didn't just feel great to play though, it was also extremely practical. Freezing monsters stops them from using magic attacks, buffing themselves, and running down the player. In the long run, their heavily reduced access to being able to even hit the player is going to save potions and keep the wizard alive. But monsters could only be frozen if they didn't actively resist the ice element. Elemental advantage against monsters gives a flat plus 50% damage multiplier. This applies for any elemental interaction where the end result is the player advantage over the monster's elemental type. The inverse is true as well. Trying to use an element on a monster who resists it cuts the damage output by half. On one hand, this gives the class a handful of amazing training spots where they just get free damage. On the other hand, it directly precludes them from training on certain monsters they just won't be able to deal sufficient damage to. At least, this was the case back in the day. Fireborers, red drakes, clangs, larangs, and torties. This is the 2007 IL Special. All of these monsters are weak to either ice or lightning, and in my mind, outdated as my knowledge may be, this is where people trained. But I'm pretty sure you don't want to be killing individual fire boars at level 50 like this guide written in 2005 recommends you do. This guide also uses the term telecasting, which is definitely the earliest mention of the word I've ever seen. Ice Lightning mages back in the early days would train on pretty much anything that didn't resist their lightning element. Monsters who do so are a small few anyway. An IL could even train at Forest of Golem if they felt like it, and it would be pretty decent. Cargos, however, were one of the more common training spots for a short time. And cargos in vanilla old school MapleStory are nothing like what we've been blessed with in modern recreations. In the game's data, mob time is a variable stored in map files that acts as a delay between respawns. This is applied to individual monster nodes. This is something I've mentioned briefly before when talking about the weird Sleepywood dungeon design. For the 12 wild cargos found on their namesake map, this mob time parameter is set to 120. For the 17 cold eyes on the map, the mob time value is set to 0. This doesn't always map directly to seconds necessarily, but it illustrates the kind of delay we're working with here. Most of the time spent training at Wild Cargo's area was actually spent killing cold eyes. Wild cargos in vanilla OSMS are these weird, mythical creatures, and Wizit made sure that was conveyed to us by making them painful to train at. An Ice Lightning in the beta era who was stuck with Victoria Island would be training at Hot Sand pretty much indefinitely. Favorable layout, lightning-weak monsters, nostalgic region, maybe they'd dabble in some red drake hunting in pursuit of the extremely valuable steely throwing knives, but things would quickly change in the IL training meta after this point. In the full release, when Orbis became available, IL didn't get all that many new monsters to train on. It was basically just the addition of the cats and the Banes for endgame, which was a nice change from having to run around on the beach all day. Oh, what a horrible thing to have to do. Just go to a volcano instead. Yes, there's an evil statue tree thing very close by, but it's okay. We have this guy guarding the entrance. Elnath was an endgame training spot in the early days after the release of GMS, but IL didn't get to participate in very much of that. And this is an example of how being forced to use elemental damage can be a bit of a detriment. They still had choices, of course, and good ones at that. In fact, Dark Yetis didn't even resist their elements, so that was still technically an option. But it wasn't the same experience as it was for most other classes, and Elnath's addition was far from as beneficial for IL as it was for FP. Time marched on even further against my wishes, and training options in second job expanded tremendously. You have Helios Tower with the cool screw things sticking out of the wall, where you could stand and snipe multiple platforms of Rets with Thunderbolt. This is a training spot I used a lot back in the day. Truckers were another viable option, being weak to lightning, but this map was in extremely high demand during its prime. It wasn't always easy to get one, regardless of how good the XP was, and don't even bother looking for a map during a 2x event. However, if truckers are available, that means Singapore is available, and if Singapore is available, alas, as is the fate for all second job classes in GMS, Ghost Ship Hell awaits. Once this was released, there weren't many better options for the second job grind. Ghost Ship could last until level 70 and get them through the early growth stages of third job where they're still getting access to their skills. Otherwise, Ice Lightning Wizards were perfectly capable of participating in any PQ at any level. They weren't as highly desired outside of their teleport capabilities, though. If there was a cleric present, for example, that cleric would take priority almost always because of heal. A lot of classes in old MapleStory have been kind of erased from the collective memory in this regard. Ice Lightning Wizards existed, even if people only wanted to acknowledge them after they reached 4th job so that they could have a powerful training partner. Luckily for Cold Boy, or perhaps not so much depending on your perspective, this is still early in GMS's timeline. His extended training arc against 47 million Red Drakes and Cellians has finally allowed him to reach level 70. He heads to Elnath's 3rd job advancement chief instructors, who force him to kill a clone of his 1st job instructor back on Victoria Island to prove his strength. Then he has to answer a bunch of trivia questions, and it's finally time for him to become a mage. Ice Lightning Mage is a little bit of a confusing term. Mage seems as though it's short for magician, but get it twisted. Mages are something else in MapleStory. The first Ice Lightning Mage skill is Partial Resistance. This is a passive skill that gives up to 70% damage reduction against both ice and lightning elements. Cold Boy has now become the monster who resists elemental damage. I never understood this though, perhaps because I haven't spent an extended amount of time playing an IL. Wouldn't you want resistance to elements that the monsters you're training on would actually have? Often simply called Ellie Amp, this skill is what really separates mages from priests. At max level, this passive skill makes all attacking spells consume 200% MP while increasing their damage by 35%. Believe it or not, this was the actual damage increase of Ellie Amp for a long time. A lot of servers have buffed this value as it's a little undertuned, so it's easy to forget this fact. Mages used to only receive a meager 35% increase at the cost of double the MP, which is an expensive resource as we know. This would be raised to a 50% increase in damage before the end of the Big Bang era though, and that's where this damage increase is really substantial. Pair that with the natural 50% damage increase from elemental advantages, and Ice Lightning becomes a lot stronger than one might initially think. Ice Strike is 3rd job's pure ice attacking spell. It hits up to 6 enemies at a time, freezing them in the process. Where 2nd job's mobbing was primarily focused on lightning damage, 3rd job switches it up a bit and gives the mage access to probably the single best ice damage spell in the game. Almost. Maybe I'm crazy, but I've always closely associated Thunder Spear with Dre86. His videos were the first time I ever saw the skill, and formative associations like that tend to stick around. It's been decades and I still think of his videos anytime I see this skill. Oh yeah, it hits 1 enemy for 1 line with lightning elemental damage. It's actually a bit underpowered. Seal is much like Slow was in 2nd job. A cool CC ability, but not highly impactful. Except Seal does have a few niche uses that make it a very good skill. Seal will, as the name suggests, seal up an enemy, preventing them from using any skills. And I mean any skills. Bombing Fish House's Ignore Weapon Attack buff? Sealed. Thanatos and Gatekeeper's mini debuff abilities? Sealed. Casting Seal doesn't require magic rocks or summoning rocks, just MP, and this is something that could have easily been forgotten with time, given how this skill is otherwise not extremely useful. Where it does find use though, it's super helpful. Spell Booster is the one instance where a magician can actually increase their attack speed. Magician's weapon attack speed is completely ignored for casting spells with only one exception. They're weird, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. Much like Ellie Amp, elemental composition was often shortened to simply Ellie Comp, which is a moniker I absolutely adore. It's like calling lobsters in old school RuneScape lobbies. This is a single line, single target attack that possesses the elemental capabilities of both ice and lightning, meaning it will deal increased damage to monsters who are weak to either of those elements. And it freezes them, too. It's a really cool combination. At this point, a magician's int will be substantial. Substantial enough that they'll start gaining a lot more MP per level, and this continues to scale all the way until level 200, or 30,000 max MP, whichever comes first. This matters a lot more for Arch Mages than it does for Bishops due to Ellie Amp and their ultimates costing more mana to begin with. This, along with the relatively heightened level of importance put on Arch Mages to deal higher damage, is yet another powerful argument for the luckless build. The less luck you have, the more MP you can get from having excessive amounts of int. The optimizations don't necessarily end there either. Let's talk about MP washing a little bit. Adding a point to your MP pool takes into account your total base MP divided by 10 rounded down. So with insane amounts of int, like 700 plus, a single point added directly to MP is going to give a mage nearly 100 extra MP. Buy an AP reset to take that point out of your MP pool and return it to int, and you've made a net gain of MP out of thin air. And your wallet, I guess. This is a more recent meta development that wasn't commonly utilized in the 2000s, as it was simply too expensive to pay $3.40 per point, but it is a way to increase the pool of that highly desirable MP. For skill builds, Ice Strike, Elemental Amplification, and Spell Booster are the highest priority skills. Technically speaking, if you can handle the ghost ship grind for even longer, it's actually most efficient to max Ellie Amp first for the damage increase. The increased MP cost won't matter just yet, that's really more of an issue for the upcoming blizzard, but free damage is always worth taking, and there aren't many passives in the game that increased damage output by a percentage. For IL training in 3rd Job, there were entire regions that were sort of worthless. Unless you're extremely powerful training on Gatekeepers and Thanatos in Deep Looty, there weren't any monsters who were particularly great options there. Thunderspear was just too slow. Given Ellie Comp's lightning powers and ability to freeze though, Spirit Vikings were a neat option. Not sure how viable they really were though. For a long time, the name of the game was Banes. After New Leaf City was added, however, Wolf Spiders became a real option. There were even sniping spots that Ice Lightning mages could use. Training in IL is very much unlike the Priest grind, where you essentially had to party with strong players and be an HS mule. Mages were actually quite independent and adaptable creatures. Their biggest weakness was that Ice Strike was by far the most effective spell for training, limiting them pretty significantly to just ice-weak monsters, or at the very least, monsters who wouldn't resist ice, which is a larger pool of monsters than you might think. Even squids in Aqua Road were viable. If a magician on any class path is min-maxing their growth, then their gear choices are going to be pretty banal. Min-maxing in this case referring to the luckless build, where they add no luck and equip whatever weapons and armors they can that have no luck requirements. Maple Shield, Gloves of Choice, Purple Adventurer or Gaia Cape, Zachem Helmet, these are the most impactful of the armor choices. The more interesting progression, straightforward as it may be, is the Elemental Wand meta. At level 70, the Ele Wand 3 becomes available. No luck required, high base magic attack, and a % modifier to ice-type damage, which is by far the most important element in 3rd and 4th job, as we know. This also means IL gets 3 separate % modifiers for their spells. I told you they were strong. This weapon is so good that it can be used exclusively until level 130, a full 60 levels later, when the Ele Wand 7 becomes available. Much the same story here. No luck requirement, high base magic attack, and a % modifier to ice-type damage, which will become very handy for farming in the future. Before this, a mage can use a wooden wand from level 8 to 70 if they so choose. They'll see no meaningful reduction of damage output by doing so, but there's actually no reason to in a world where there are good luckless options available. The most recognizable of these is likely the Luckless Staff family, from the Maple Llama Staff to the Nocturnal Staff rewarded from an NLC quest to the Maple Wisdom Staff at level 64. These are all a common sight on early ILs. Attack speed on weapons doesn't matter for mages in just about every instance. However, the Evil Wings staff is often cited as being an important choice for mages due to its higher attack speed. This is a confusing piece of mage progression that I feel has never been properly elaborated on, much like the one-handed versus two-handed discussion for warriors, so let's talk about it a bit. Attack speed for magicians is very odd. Instead of taking the weapon's attack speed into consideration, a magician's attack speed is based off of the individual spell's cast speed. The only exception to this rule is Fire Poison's explosion spell, which we'll talk about when the time comes. The best way I can illustrate this distinction as it pertains to Ice Lightning mages specifically is as follows. You have a base casting speed that differs for every single spell. Let's use Ice Strike as our example. The casting speed of Ice Strike will always be 1050 milliseconds, since it doesn't take into account weapon attack speed. So, no matter whether Cold Boy is using a 2 attack speed weapon or a 9 attack speed weapon, Ice Strike will always take 1050 milliseconds to cast. The only modifier that impacts casting speed is Spell Booster, as it's specifically designed for that purpose. With max level Spell Booster, the new cast time of Ice Strike is 930 milliseconds. An improvement. I have to be honest, I have never really understood the dynamics of this until recently. It was during my time playing Ice Lightning in MapleStory that it started to really click for me. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, unsure of why some people want the Evil Wings staff for its faster attack speed, but at the same time say that attack speed doesn't matter for magicians, hopefully this helps you understand how it works, because it's very weird and unintuitive. One last note regarding casting speed. Buccaneer's Speed Infusion, which we'll talk about later, does not have an impact on casting speed, with the one exception to this again being Explosion, of course, because that skill's just weird. The time has come. Eidolon's Grand Tournament is here. The rules are simple. Tournaments take place every day, with everyone in the game competing to see who has the best pet collection. The more pets you have, the better your chances at victory. There's some skill involved, there's some luck involved, and it's exciting to watch. Upsets happen all the time. You get 3 lives, lose 3 matches, and you're out of the tournament, single elimination style. The stakes are high and the rewards are entirely cosmetic. No pay-to-win pet bonuses for placing high. Watching the final matches play out in replays is surprisingly fun. I've never been so hyped to root for my spirit reindeer pet. I even managed to make it to the silver division, but just barely. And this is just one of the many things to explore in Eidolon, as I've learned throughout my time playing. As an idle MMO, it doesn't demand as much of my time as other MMOs, and that's extremely valuable to me these days. I can read through an entire video essay script and check in on my tournament matches whenever I get a chance. Eidolon is available on both iOS and Steam, so I can hop in-game on my phone to check up on things. And whenever I'm at my computer, I can launch the game through Steam, and my account is seamlessly saved to the cloud, which is very convenient. You can play Eidolon for free on Steam and check out the new Grand Tournament using the links posted in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks again to Eidolon for sponsoring this video. Cold Boy's grind to level 120 was a journey filled with plenty of red Kentaurises and other blood-red leaf-free monsters who are all susceptible to ice. Ice Lightning Mages are noticeably more capable than priests when it comes to killing bosses, but let's be honest, this is a magician. He has more than enough money to just buy the secret spell scroll and skip all that Manon and Griffey nonsense. Cold Boy jumps straight to the reward, and there's no reward better in old MapleStory than gaining access to one of the most powerful skills of the ultimate trio. Ice Lightning Archmages are probably ranked second in popularity behind bishops, and for good reason. The competition is closer than one might expect. Maple Warrior on a Magician has one distinction that's worth bringing up, which is the MP increase from having high int. Even at level 9, which all classes gain access to without the use of a mastery book, that's a 5% increase in total int. This results in 4th job mages slowly ramping up their MP gains even further, with a weird edge case where mages who leveled beyond 120 before Maple Warrior was released having less MP overall. This is not something I've ever seen discussed, so it's probably not a significant difference between the two, but it's something that I'm thinking about now. Either way, MP will very quickly become an extremely important resource for Cold Boy from now on, and any increase to these gains help tremendously. There's a skill that I never realized was actually a common magician 4th job skill, Big Bang. This skill requires a charge time before casting, and it was never particularly amazing during this era. It would eventually become modern-day Bishop's primary mobbing skill, but back at this time, it was really more of an experimental addition. That charge time was simply too detrimental. Then there's Mana Reflection, and this is a skill I've always thought was a little bit undertuned. Mana Reflection is effectively the magic version of Power Guard, where damage is reflected back to the attacker. However, unlike Power Guard, Mana Reflection does not come with built-in damage reduction for the Arch Mage, which I think is a little unfair. Now we reach a skill that is so rarely discussed, I had actually forgotten about it. Ice Demon is a mobbing skill with a relatively low spell damage of only 100. For reference, 3rd job's Ice Strike has 90, and the upcoming Blizzard has 570. So Ice Demon is not a huge improvement over Ice Strike, and it hits less monsters, but that's not really what it's intended for. Ice Demon has a unique effect, shared only with Fire Poison Archmage's Fire Demon, where monsters stricken by the attack will become susceptible to the opposing element. Even if you use Ice Demon on a monster who resists fire, it will make them vulnerable to fire. This is an extremely cool and underutilized mechanic. I can't believe I never knew about this until now. It's even cooler when you consider the next skill in the kit. Ifrit. In old school MapleStory, Archmages received summons for the opposing elements. In the case of Ice Lightning, it's the fire type Ifrit, and in the case of Fire Poison, it was Elkines. This summon is designed to synergize directly with Ice and Fire Demon, gaining a massive increase in damage output when a monster is made susceptible to their elemental type. And this is a pretty massive increase in damage output. From my initial testing, it's something like a 300% increase in damage. Unfortunately, summons in old MapleStory are generally not heavily impactful, and Ifrit is no exception. I wish they had done more with this synergetic combo of Ice Demon and Ifrit. It feels like a huge missed opportunity. The next skill on the list is Infinity. For 40 seconds, MP consumption for casting spells is completely removed, an awesome little buff for burst damage that has been redesigned in the modern day to no longer have its original ridiculous 10-minute cooldown. The thing with a skill like this, though, is that it would still technically be worth using even if it had something like a 60-minute cooldown. There's no argument against removing all MP costs for 40 seconds, besides how annoying that theoretical cooldown would be, and how annoying the real-life cooldown of 10 minutes actually was. This skill annoys me in the same way Shadower's smokescreen annoys me. One of the other skills that I always felt was undertuned is Chain Lightning. This is exactly as it sounds. A lightning attack that hits multiple enemies if they're nearby each other, jumping to the next enemy like a Tesla coil. Awesome concept, flawed execution. The major issue with Chain Lightning is that its damage is reduced with every jump. In my testing, this seems to be a reduction of about 30% per monster, resulting in the final monster receiving a measly 12% of the original damage. I understand the logic behind this decision from a design perspective, but man, it always just sucked to see that huge fall off. And I'm not sure it was necessary to design the skill like this in the first place. Why not just let it do full damage to all 6 monsters? I mean, Nightlord exists. That's my argument for everything in MapleStory. All of these undertuned skills and otherwise missed opportunities are made up for by this skill, though. Blizzard is an Ice Lightning Arch Mage's ultimate skill, hitting up to 15 enemies at a time with a massive range and huge damage, especially when you take into account their elemental advantage against fire-type monsters, their elemental wands, and Ellie Amp bonus damage multipliers. Blizzard, unlike the other 2 Magician ultimates, had the added benefit of freezing enemies. This little bonus was incredibly valuable over time, as it would prevent monsters from attacking the Arch Mage, who had just expended a massive 7,000 MP for a single cast of Blizzard. And this is why mana is so insanely important for an Arch Mage. In GMS, we were uniquely positioned to spam these ultimates because of our access to Mana Bowls, a cheap MP recovery potion that could be purchased en masse at NLC. Other regions' Arch Mages were usually a bit more reserved with this spell, but leave it to us to make our characters fat and happy with a busted potion that removed all balance. In the early 120s, when the Arch Mage is just starting to use Blizzard after completing the quest line to unlock it, of course, they're still very likely to die at the slightest hint of incoming damage. The amount of MP the skill requires is such a huge portion of their MP pool for a long time, and this MP consumption amount only increases until the skill reaches level 20, at which point it begins to drop a bit on the road to level 30. Unlike Genesis, which was one of the most valuable skills of all time, Blizzard was noticeably less expensive. It wasn't free though. Blizzard 20 dropped from Oblivion Guardians, so it could be farmed from normal monsters, dropping its value tremendously. Blizzard 30, however, only dropped from Horntail and Pink Bean. Because Archmages simply weren't as popular as bishops, as well as the insanely high MP requirement of their ultimates, Blizzard 30 was more reasonably affordable. Such a powerful skill still had a cost though, so it wasn't uncommon to park Blizzard at level 10 until the IL had the skill points to max it out completely, bypassing the hellish level 20 MP cost spike. Because if the higher levels don't lower the number of hits required to kill the monsters, then leveling it beyond 10 is effectively just increasing MP consumption for no good reason. And Blizzard's damage was anything but low. A reasonably funded, luckless Ice Lightning Archmage was very capable of hitting over 100k damage with Blizzard, even on neutral monsters. When potentials were added towards the end of the era, hitting the 199k damage cap was also easily doable. There were people doing so before the addition of potentials. Archmages, for all of their undertuned skills and lack of single-target DPS, were actually incredibly powerful farmers. The best. Training options were mildly interesting for ILs. In the early 120s, when they were getting on their feet, they would train at things like Blood Harps and Red Wyverns, low-level Ice-weak monsters who could quickly get them to a more powerful level. Later on, they could destroy Skellies pretty easily, and this of course provided great XP all the way to 200. I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity with Temple of Time though, as if poor Ice Lightning Archmages weren't exposed to enough missed opportunities. You see, Chief Oblivion Guardians in Road to Oblivion are not weak to ice, only poison, but they're red, which is kind of fucked up. This came as a surprise to me when doing research for this video, and it was actually kind of a disappointing fact to learn. I wish Ice Lightning Archmages received some super nice endgame option, but alas, I have no clue where they go from that point on. Unfortunately, I'm not sorry for the video title pun, and I never will be. Ice Lightning Mages are definitely powerful, and there's no doubt about that. Their ability to freeze monsters is unparalleled by any other class in the game, except for maybe Marksmen, and it's quite an understated element of the class. Being able to freeze monsters will never stop being viscerally satisfying. Beyond farming, Ice Lightning Archmages were generally not exceptional damage dealers at this point in time. Their cool and potentially powerful skills were always hindered in some way that precluded them from becoming a standout in bossing scenarios. Generally speaking, Nexon was not great about designing their bosses to be friendly to elemental Archmages pre-Big Bang. There were some instances of this, such as the mini beans in the pink bean fight being weak to both fire and ice, or Scarlion and Relic being weak to fire. These instances of elemental Archmages being particularly desired in bossing content are relatively few and far between, but they always dominated the farming meta. Hopefully, someday we can see their implementation being more favorable for real bossing scenarios, but there's nothing wrong with simply being one of the greatest farming classes to ever do it.